The Bible tells us a lot about war and conflict. It's a common theme in the Old Testament, and sometimes God even took sides. It's different than what the New Testament tells us, which is to love our enemies and turn the other cheek. But we also know that the world is an imperfect place, and that sometimes we must stand up for what is right. And so early leaders in the church, such as St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, formulated a theory they called the just war theory, which stipulated that war could be justified under certain circumstances if the objective was to restore peace and overcome evil. In those circumstances, war could be justified. But it is difficult to imagine that back then they comprehended the horrors of modern day warfare. And I'm reminded of the words of John Stuart Mill, an early English philosopher. And he said, "War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling, which thinks that nothing is worth war, is much worse. The person who has nothing for which he is willing to fight, nothing which is more important than his own personal safety, is a miserable creature, and has no chance of being free unless made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself." In other words, freedom, whether it be personal freedom or religious freedom, sometimes has to be defended. And so with that context, I'm going to turn and look at one of the key events for Canadian military historians and for Canadians in general, as we are in the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Some have debated the strategic importance of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, whether it really had much bearing on the outcome of the war. But what is not debated is that it was a monumental accomplishment. It was also the first time that all 4 Canadian divisions fought together. It was revolutionary in that it perfected tactics that had failed spectacularly at earlier battles such as the Somme. The Canadians changed a lot of what was accepted in warfare and made sure that each soldier knew their role and had a comprehension of the overall battle plan. And it was pushed down to the lowest levels. Every person knew their mission, and everyone knew everybody else's job as well. On April 9th, 1917, the battle began with 15,000 men going over top of the trenches, sheltered mostly by their own artillery as they advanced on the German trenches. The battle lasted for 3 days, and at the end, the Canadians had achieved all of their objectives at a staggering cost of 3,600 lives. Including wounded, their casualty count was over 10,000. At the end of the war, to commemorate all of the Canadian sacrifices, Vimy Ridge was chosen as the site to build Canada's main monument to the Great War. You can see the twin spires there. I'm not sure if this is the back or the front of the monument, but you can get an idea of the scale of the monument. I'm not the smallest person in the world, but I certainly felt like it standing on the steps there. You can get an idea of just the sheer magnitude and power of the monument. The other side of the monument, you can see the central figure of a female with her head lowered, who represents Canada mourning her loss and standing over a sarcophagus at the bottom of the monument. It was remarked that the Canadians had to advance over an open cemetery to achieve their objectives because the lives of so many French, German, and English soldiers who had tried and failed to take the ridge or died defending it lay in no man's land between the Canadian lines and the German lines. And so the Canadians had to advance over that. And you can see a lot of that battlefield has been preserved to this day. And you can imagine at the time covered in mud and water, how difficult it must have been to advance through that, and not to mention the barbed wire. Many of the 3,600 are buried in 3 cemeteries at Vimy. You can see here how meticulously kept they are by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Each Commonwealth cemetery has the cross of sacrifice displayed prominently, as you can see here. And you can also see 2 grave markers there with the Canadian maple leaf, but no name. And that was one of the great tragedies of the First World War, where 60,000 Canadian lives were lost. Almost a third of them have no known resting place. To commemorate those who could not be identified or could not be recovered, their names were engraved on monuments like Vimy. And so there's over 16,000 names carved on the walls of the monument of soldiers who have no known resting place or who were never recovered. It's an incredibly powerful tribute. And one of those names, and the Fenelon Falls congregation heard this last year, but I think it's a story worth repeating. And for those at Glenarm, the next time you're in Fenelon, if you have a look at in the church sanctuary, the Great War Monument down at the front, you'll see the name of Major Horace Hutchins. Major Hutchins enlisted early in the war. He went overseas with the 109th Regiment out of Lindsay. Once he was in England, he was posted to another regiment, and he took a lieutenant's position to get to the front line. And he was one of the first to go over the top in the Battle of Vimy Ridge. As you can see there, he was killed on the 10th of April, on the second day of the battle. His body was either never recovered or could not be identified. And so his name is one of the 16,000 on the Vimy Memorial. And that's just the inscription at the front of the memorial, telling you the sick. I think it's hard to see, but there's 11,000 names on the memorial at Vimy, and the rest are at a place in Ypres called Menon's Gate. One of the other great Canadian contributions to the Great War was that of a surgeon, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, who wrote likely the most famous poem from the First World War in Flanders Fields. And so I'm going to close with a video reading of that poem. Thank you very much for your time.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved. And now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.